Well, joining me live from Perth is the Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles, and he's the Defence Minister as well. Richard Marles, thanks for joining me. Hard not to start on this statement by Murray Watt on Sunday Agenda yesterday that there was no proposal from the Russians to the Indonesians concerning basing an air base in Indonesia. Was there a request or a proposal from the Russians to the Indonesians, in your view?
Well, firstly, I think what Murray was saying is that there's not any prospect of there being any Russian aircraft operating from Indonesia, and that's what was affirmed to me by Minister Shafri in our conversation last week, the Defence Minister of Indonesia. But ultimately, the question you're asking me about is conversations that are happening between two other countries. What we know about that and when we knew about it is obviously not something I'm going to ventilate in the public domain, and that's for good reason. What matters here is that the Indonesians have made it completely clear to us that they have absolutely no intent of having Russian aircraft operating from their nation, and that doesn't surprise me because that's utterly consistent with the relationship that we have built over the last 3 years.
So there was a request, but then they're just not going to take it up.
Well, you've just made an assertion there. I'm just not going to get into the question of what communications happen between two other countries. What matters in terms of Australia's national interest is the statement that Defence Minister Shafri said to me. I mean, it's really important that we are careful in the way in which we talk about this stuff, in the way in which we describe what happens internationally. Because last week what we did have was an example of someone being completely lacking in care when the Leader of the Opposition put words in the mouth of the Indonesian President. Now, that was reckless and it was dangerous. It was shooting from the hip, and what it demonstrated was just the speed with which, Peter Dutton will seek domestic political advantage at the expense of Australia's national interest overseas, and that's really what happened last week. We are going to be careful in the way in which we describe this, and that's why I'm not going to get into what conversations happen between two other countries.
But Murray Watt misspoke here by saying there was no proposal, right?
Well, I think Murray's making the point that there's not a prospect of there being Indonesian aircraft operating Russian aircraft operating from Indonesia, which is exactly what was affirmed to me by Defence Minister Shafri.
But he said there was no proposal. He said there was no proposal, and that's wrong.
Well,
or do you say Jane's Defence magazine, which reported this and has documents, is wrong?
Well, again, I'm not going to get into Jane's story or what they're reporting. Ultimately, it boils down to this. The question of whether there was a proposal between Russia and Indonesia is a question of a conversation or an interaction between two other countries. Now, what we know about that is not something I'm going to ventilate or in the public domain, nor am I going to comment on it. What matters is the assurance that Indonesia has provided to us, which they did with great speed and when we reached out.
All right.
And that was to assure us that there was no prospect of Russian aircraft operating from their soil, and that's obviously good news, but it's not a surprise because it's consistent with the relationship that we've built.
Why won't you give the opposition a briefing on this?
Oh, because this is a complete smokescreen, Andrew. Firstly, there is no decision of government here. The government has taken no decision in relation to any of this. To be frank, what the opposition are trying to do with this whole issue about whether or not there is a briefing is to find some kind of excuse for what Peter Dutton did last week. Now, briefing or no briefing, to put words in the mouth of any person, let alone a foreign leader, let alone the President of Indonesia, is unforgivable. And no brief changes that. And yet what they're trying to do is to create a smokescreen around what Peter Dutton did last week. There is no excuse for the steps that Peter Dutton took last week in verballing the Indonesian president, and the reason he went there with such speed was to make a domestic political point, and it's demonstrated everything about what our alternative Prime Minister looks like under pressure. I mean, he will go down, he will go there, and if it compromises Australia's national interest, he's happy to do that, and we've seen that time and again. That was what was on display last week. Briefing or no briefing, it doesn't distract from that fact.
Are you concerned with Donald Trump in power looking more inward, having a different approach to foreign policy, taking foreign aid away, that the Russians and the Chinese will be able to make ground in areas like Asia and the Pacific?
Well, I've spoken about this a number of times. I think that the Trump administration has a real focus on the Indo-Pacific. That was really clear to me in the meeting I had with Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth, and indeed when you look at other comments that have been made, including from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, there is a real focus on the Indo-Pacific. So I do take comfort from that, and I have a sense of optimism about the way in which we can work with the Trump administration around our shared defence interests in the Indo-Pacific and more broadly in the world. And we very much look forward to working with the Trump administration in furthering that interest. There is a very, very clear focus on what's at stake in the Indo-Pacific. That was very clear to me in the meeting I had with Secretary of Defence Hegseth. And as I say, I have a sense of confidence about that.
Well, let's talk about Secretary of Defence Pete Hegseth. He seems to be sharing details about attacks that the US are about to make on Yemen in signal to all manner of people. What do you make of that?
Well, look, I'm not going to comment on that, and I don't think it's appropriate that a person in my situation should be commenting on that. Again, I mean, Secretary of Defence Hegseth will no doubt answer those questions about what reports have been in the media. What I can say is, in the conversation I've had with Secretary Hegseth, in the interactions that we are having with the US under the Trump administration in terms of our shared defence interests, we have a sense of confidence about how we can advance them. We have a very deep defence relationship, one which is very trusted, and none of that has changed. And we look forward to working very closely with the United States over the next 4 years under President Trump.
Are you communicating with Mr Hegseth on Signal?
I'm not communicating with the Secretary of Defence on Signal. And again, I'll let him answer questions in relation to that. I'm not going to comment on any of those media reports. Again, we come back to the fact that we've got a very trusted relationship with the United States, and I'm very confident about how we can advance it.
All right. Now, the Coalition plans to announce an increase in defence spending this week. That appears to be well known. Is that something the government might look to match, or is your level of defence spending set in stone prior to the election?
Well, I think Australians can firstly have a deep sense of cynicism and scepticism about whatever it is that the Coalition may or may not announce reportedly in the next few days. But what we can absolutely know is that the Coalition have treated the Australian people with absolute contempt in terms of their defence policy. I mean, people are voting tomorrow. They start voting tomorrow. And we still don't have a defence policy from the Coalition. It begs the question as to what on earth have they been doing for the last 3 years. I mean, they are big on hoopla. They're big on all announcements, which we saw when Peter Dutton was formerly the Defence Minister. What he handed to us was $42 billion worth of announcements without any money behind them. It's a quarter of what Defence was expected to procure. It had no money for. And when they did spend money, we saw 28 different projects running a combined 97 years over time. Like, that was the actual record of Peter Dutton and the Coalition when it comes to defence. What we do see from the Coalition when it comes to defence is conceit. They talk a big game when it comes to defence. But in terms of substance, we have literally seen nothing. And Australians are about to start voting tomorrow. And the fact that we do not have a defence policy as we're talking with each other right now from the Coalition is a disgrace. And it demonstrates how little priority they place on defence and the utter contempt they have for the Australian people when it comes to defence.
You must be concerned in terms of the state of the budget at the prospects for defence spending going forward as Defence Minister, even if you're re-elected. Well,
I mean, what you've seen from us over the last 3 years is the biggest peacetime increase in defence spending in our nation's history. That's actually what we've done. That's in the budget. Over the next 10 years in the budget, over the next 4 years in the budget, it's what we've already spent right now. Like last financial year was the biggest spending of defence procurement that we've had, and this financial year will be even more. We are doing it. You know, we are speaking with our actions. And it is not about making grand announcements with nothing to back them up. We're actually doing it. And we'll continue to have the conversation about what is the appropriate level of defence spending going forward. Rational people have a defence spend which is relative to strategic threat and complexity. We certainly face that, and we are rational people, and we'll continue that conversation. But you can look at what we've done over the last 3 years, and as a stark contrast to all the bravado that you saw from the Liberals, what you actually have had from us over the last 3 years is in fact the biggest increase in peacetime spending for our defence force, and that is the spirit that we will take into the way in which we govern in respect of defence over the next 3 years.
Now, Deputy Prime Minister, I've been sent a how to vote card from your seat that has you preferencing the Greens second ahead of the Liberals. Presumably this is some sort of broader deal. Is that ideal, given their stance on defence, given their stance on AUKUS, that you put them ahead of anyone else?
Well, what I'm very keen to see is my own re-election in the seat of Corio. So let me make that clear. I am very confident that my preferences are not going to come into play in terms of how Corio plays out. What we see, though, from the coalition when it comes to defence is what I've just described, a party which absolutely treats this country and Australians with total contempt.
Almost out of time, and I was asking about the Greens, but let me ask you quite quickly here. The Labor campaign's been accused of two chief lies when it comes to this campaign. The first is the $600 billion for nuclear figure. Why are you using that as fact when it's from the Smart Energy Council, a lobby group funded by government and pro-renewables?
Well, derived from data that was produced by the CSIRO and AEMO. I mean, that's where it comes from. But more to the point, it's not been refuted by the coalition. I mean, they can say that they don't agree with it, but it's not like they have been able to identify how much it is going to cost to do their nuclear power scheme.
Isn't saying it's $120 billion refuting it?
You were interviewing Bridget McKenzie yesterday. She was unable to say how much it was going to cost or where the cuts were going to come from to pay for it. That's the fact of the matter. And so, you know, we're using figures that are ultimately derived from data that has come from CSIRO and AEMO. And yes, it's been put together by the Smart Energy Council, but that's where they get their data from. We don't see this being refuted in a substantive way from the Liberals.
Well,
and what we do see is a continued inability to explain where cuts are going to come from.
Well, let me ask you about this other one. It's only fair. Your ad says the coalition are going to cut all urgent care clinics if elected. That's demonstrably false, isn't it? That's not true.
Well, the coalition have been completely critical of urgent care clinics from the moment that we started rolling them out. You don't need to take me on that. You can just look at the public record in terms of all the comments that have been made by the coalition, which has criticised urgent care clinics from the moment that we've started rolling them out. And in terms of further urgent care clinics, they're making it clear they will not be rolled out. So what we've announced in Torquay, for example, near my neck of the woods, or what we've announced in Cairns as a new urgent care clinic there, that's not happening. The coalition have been utterly critical when it comes to urgent care clinics. Now, that's fine. If they want to stand on that position, they can. They're not walking away from that, it seems to me. But urgent care clinics, we are clear, have made a real difference for people in terms of being able to have them receive non-life-threatening urgent care and do so quickly. And I think we're completely entitled to explain the benefits of them, the fact that the coalition have opposed them from the get-go, and that urgent care clinics will not be built under the coalition.
Richard Marles, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.